Okay, so you want to own a bottled water factory, and honestly, who would not? You take water that falls from the sky for free, run it through a filter, pour it into a plastic bottle, and sell it for $1.50. It looks like the purest markup in all of business. Sell rain, keep the difference, repeat until rich. So what is the trap? This. Water is the cheapest thing in your factory, and it is the reason most owners quietly go broke. By the end of this video, you will understand what a bottled water company is actually selling, because it was never really the water. Let us start with the number that makes everyone fall in love with this business. The water itself. If you bottle purified municipal water, the kind sitting inside most of the big-name bottles on the shelf, the liquid in a $1 bottle costs you a fraction of a single cent. And that is not an exaggeration. Water leaves the tap for something like 1/10 of a cent a gallon, so the actual water in your bottle rounds down to almost nothing. The customer pays $1, $2, sometimes $4 or $5 for a fancy label. On paper, that is not a business. That is alchemy. Buy nothing, sell something, pocket the gap forever. So why is almost nobody getting rich this way? Why do most independent water bottlers run on razor-thin margins and live one bad quarter away from closing the doors? Here is a number that should stop the fantasy cold before it even starts. The biggest bottled water operations on Earth, the giants who buy everything at the lowest possible price, run an operating margin on their water of only around 10%. At Nestle, for years, the packaged water business earned roughly 10 cents of operating profit on the dollar, while the company as a whole earned closer to 15. Water was not the crown jewel. Water was the part that quietly dragged the average down. Analysts had a word for it: dilutive. The most efficient water sellers in history made less on water than they made on almost everything else they touched. So if the Titans only squeezed 10% out of it, what exactly do you think is left for the dreamer with one plant? The answer is the first thing you have to understand about this entire industry. You are not really selling water. The water is a rounding error. What you are actually selling and paying for is everything wrapped around the water. And everything around the water is heavy, expensive, and brutally competitive. So let us do the thing nobody in the fantasy ever does. Let us actually build the bottle and count the cost piece by piece. When you go to a contract bottler, a co-packer, the company that will actually make your branded water for you, a finished bottle, filled, capped, labeled, tested, and ready to sell, costs you somewhere around 26 cents at the low end and can run up past 60 cents depending on the bottle and the volume. Sit with that for a second. The water inside was a fraction of a cent. The finished thing is 26 cents, which means before you have paid for a truck, a warehouse, a salesperson, or a single dollar of marketing, 99% of your cost is not water at all. It is everything the water is wearing. Start with the bottle itself. Here is a fact that stops most first-time owners cold. The empty plastic bottle costs more than the water inside it. The cap costs more than the water. The label and the glue and the printing cost more than the water. That clear plastic bottle is made from a material called PET, and PET is made from oil. And in 2025, domestic PT resin ran somewhere around 50 to 60 cents a pound. A single lightweight water bottle uses only a few grams of it, so the plastic in one bottle is only a cent or two. But multiply that by the hundreds of millions of bottles a real operation runs, and that penny of plastic becomes the single largest raw material line in your entire business. Not the water, the petroleum. Yeah. And a petroleum product has a price that swings every single time the oil market moves. When oil goes up, your bottle goes up. When new tariffs hit imported resin, as they did in the back half of 2025, sending spot prices jumping 6 to 9 cents a pound almost overnight, your bottle goes up again. And there is nothing you can do but eat it. You walked into the water business and you quietly became a hostage of the oil business. You just did not read that part of the contract. Now stack on the machine that turns those parts into product. A real bottling line is not a garden hose and a funnel. It is industrial equipment, and a lot of it. You need filtration and purification systems. You need a blow molder that inflates the little plastic preforms into full bottles. You need a filler, a capper, a labeler, a system to sterilize everything, and packaging machines to shrink wrap it all onto pallets. This is why the numbers split so violently at the very start. If you go the light way and just hire a co-packer to make water with your label on it, you can start for a couple $1,000s. But if you want to actually own the plant, the source, the machines, the real thing, you are looking at $500,000 to well over $2 million just to open the doors. And that is before you have sold a single bottle. And the permits are not a formality, because water is one of the most regulated things you can put in a package. Think about it. You are selling a product that goes directly inside people's bodies, that children drink, that hospitals use, that a whole family trusts without a second thought. So in most places, you are dealing with health departments, environmental agencies, water rights authorities, and inspectors who test your product constantly. Because if you get it wrong, people do not just get a bad meal, people get sick. The dream said easy money. The invoice said otherwise. But here is the thing. None of that is the real killer. Not the plastic, not the machines, not even the permits. The real killer is the one thing nobody thinks about when they picture this beautiful business. Weight. Water is heavy. 1 liter weighs about 1 kilogram. And here is the cruel math sitting underneath the entire industry. So let us actually run it. A freight truck can legally haul about 44,000 pounds of payload before it is over the limit and off the road. A case of 24 half-liter bottles weighs roughly 30 pounds. Do the division. That truck maxes out at around 1,400 cases of water. And here is the part that hurts. It hits that weight limit with the trailer barely more than half full of space. You physically cannot use the rest of the truck because the water is already too heavy. You are paying to move air you are not allowed to fill. Now put a dollar figure on hauling that truck. Freight on a well-loaded truck runs roughly 5 to 10 cents a pound over a 1,000-mile trip. 44,000 pounds at say 7 cents is around $3,000 to move 1 truckload 1,000 miles. Spread across 1,400 cases, that is over $2 of pure freight on every single case, before anyone makes a cent of profit. $2 a case, on a product where the whole case might wholesale for 4 or 5. Ship it 1,000 miles and freight alone can eat 50% of the sale. Now compare that to selling it 100 miles from your plant, where that same freight might be 20 or 30 cents a case. Same water, same bottle. The only thing that changed was distance, and distance quietly decided whether you made money or lost it. This is why people in the industry will tell you the quiet truth. Bottled water is not really a beverage business. It is a logistics business wearing the costume of a beverage. The product is cheap. Moving the product is savagely expensive. And whoever solves the moving problem wins. So step back and look at what you have actually built. A factory full of expensive machines, turning oil into bottles, filling those bottles with a product worth almost nothing, then paying $2 a case to drag that heavy, low-value cargo across a map. It sounds completely insane. So why does anyone do it? Why is this a nearly $300 billion global industry instead of a punchline? Because there is a second business hiding inside the first one. And that second business is the only reason any of this exists at all. Here's the secret. In bottled water, you are not selling hydration. Everyone already has water. It comes out of the wall in their kitchen for 1/10 of a cent a gallon. Nobody on earth is thirsty in a way that only your specific bottle can solve. So what are they actually paying for? They are paying for 3 things: trust, convenience, and identity. Those 3 things are the real product. The water is just the delivery system. Start with trust. When a person buys a sealed bottle of water, they are buying a promise. The promise that this water is clean, safe, consistent, and will not make them or their kids sick. And in a huge number of moments, that promise is worth real money. On a plane at 35,000 feet, in a stadium packed with 80,000 people, in a country where the tap simply cannot be trusted, in a disaster zone after a storm knocks the pipes out, and suddenly a pallet of sealed water is one of the most valuable things for 100 miles. You are not selling the liquid in those moments. You are selling certainty about the liquid. And it turns out certainty is something people will pay 1,000 times markup for, and thank you while they do it. Then there is convenience. Nobody drives across town for water. They buy it because it is right there, cold, sealed, and grabbable at the exact second the thirst hits. Which means, just like the coffee shop and just like the bar, this business lives or dies on being in the right place at the right moment. On the shelf at eye level, in the cooler by the register, in the vending machine, at the airport gate, the gym, the checkout line, the gas station. The water is not competing on taste. Most people cannot tell one purified water from another in a blind test to save their life. It is competing on being the closest sealed bottle when someone gets thirsty. And winning that placement is its own brutal war. Because the shelf space, the cooler space, the checkout space, it is all owned, defended, and paid for by companies far, far bigger than you. In the United States, a single giant like Nestle's old water business held around 1/4 of the entire market, with Coca-Cola and Pepsi controlling big chunks more. You are not fighting over water. You are fighting over inches of real estate at eye level, and the giants got there first. And then there is the third product, the one that quietly turns a commodity into a fortune: identity. Because somewhere along the way, the smartest players in this industry realized something. If water is basically all the same, then the only thing left to sell is what the bottle says about the person holding it. And the moment they understood that, everything changed. So let us talk about the strangest, most revealing part of this entire business, the premium water game. On one end of the shelf, you have plain purified water fighting to the death over pennies. On the other end of the same shelf, you have bottles selling for $3, $4, even $10. Water from a glacier, water from a volcanic aquifer, water in a heavy, beautiful glass bottle with a designer shape and a story printed on the side. And here is the part that should break your brain. In a blind taste test, most people cannot reliably tell that $10 water from the tap in their own kitchen. So what on earth are those customers paying for? They are not paying for better hydration. Their body cannot even tell the difference. They are paying to hold something, to be seen holding it, to feel clean and wealthy and healthy and just a little bit above the person drinking from the water fountain. Premium water is not a beverage. It is a status accessory that happens to be drinkable. It is the exact same trick as the bottle service table in the nightclub, where the alcohol matters less than who can see you buy it. You are not selling the liquid. You are selling the theater around the liquid. And nobody has ever proven that better than a brand called Fiji. Think about the sheer madness of the business model for a second, especially now that we have done the freight math. You take water from an aquifer on a group of islands in the South Pacific, roughly as far from most of its customers as it is physically possible to be. Then you put it in a heavy, square, premium bottle, and you ship that heavy water thousands of miles across an entire ocean to sell it in cities that already have perfectly clean tap water for free. Remember what we just learned. Freight is the killer. Distance destroys the margin. Fiji looked at that iron rule of the entire industry and broke it on purpose. And it only survives because of one thing. It does not sell at $1. It sells at a premium, high enough that even after paying to drag water across the planet, the margin holds. The distance is not a cost Fiji is hiding. The distance is the whole product. You are drinking somewhere you are not. That is not hydration. That is a small, cold vacation you can hold in one hand, and you are paying enough for it to make the freight math work. And then there is the brand that took this idea to its most ridiculous, most brilliant extreme, Liquid Death. Here is a company that started in 2019 selling plain water in a tall black can that looks like a cheap beer, with a heavy metal skull on the side and the slogan, "Murder Your Thirst." It is water, just water, the cheapest, most ordinary product on earth, but wrapped in a punk rock, anti-corporate, deliberately absurd brand that people genuinely love and want to be seen holding. And here are the real numbers, because they are almost hard to believe. In 2023, that silly can of water did $263 million in retail sales, more than double the year before. And in 2024, the company raised money at a valuation of $1.4 billion. Let that sink in. $1.4 billion. For water. In a can. The water was never the point. Not for 1 second. The brand was the entire business, and the water was just the excuse to sell it. If you ever needed proof that this industry runs on identity and not on liquid, there it is in a black can with a skull on it. So this is the great divide that splits the whole industry in two. At the bottom, water is a commodity, and a commodity is a brutal, thin margin grind where the giants squeeze 10% and everyone smaller squeezes less. Now, there is one exception that tempts every newcomer. Private label. Bottling cheap water under a store's name or for a local event can show gross markups that look enormous on paper, 50%, even higher, because the water is so cheap to make. But watch what happens to that fat number the moment it meets the real world. Freight eats it. The store demands the lowest price. A giant undercuts you, and that beautiful gross margin collapses into a few thin pennies of actual profit, or nothing at all. That is why so many private label water brands look profitable in a spreadsheet and quietly die in a warehouse. The markup was never the margin. At the top, though, water is a brand, and a brand prints money. It is the exact same substance in both cases. Completely different business. The losers spend their lives selling water. The winners climb out of selling water and into selling a name people trust, or a name people want to be seen holding. That climb, from commodity to brand, is the entire game. But watch how fragile that climb really is, because there is a famous story that shows both the height and the fall in one single shot. In 1977, a French company named Perrier launched an enormous marketing campaign in the United States. At the time, the idea sounded ridiculous. Americans had clean, free tap water absolutely everywhere. Selling them water in a bottle was like selling them bottled air. But Perrier did not sell water. It sold sophistication. It made a little green glass bottle of sparkling water feel European, elegant, and expensive. It put the bottle in the hands of celebrities and marathon runners and the kind of people who had, in the language of the time, arrived. And it worked spectacularly. Within a few years, Perrier had turned a free substance into a booming, fashionable, high-margin habit, and it is widely credited with lighting the fuse on the entire American bottled water craze that followed. The water was never the product, the image was. But here is the twist that should stop you cold. In early 1990, traces of a chemical called benzene were discovered in some Perrier bottles. The amounts were tiny, far too small to actually harm anyone. But it did not matter. It did not matter at all. Because Perrier had spent years selling one thing above everything else: purity. Its entire brand, its whole reason to charge a premium, was the promise that this was the cleanest, most flawless, most perfect water on the planet. And the second that promise cracked, the company had no choice but to pull its product from shelves all over the world. Roughly 160 million bottles yanked from 120 countries in one of the biggest recalls of its kind ever seen. The relaunch cost over $250 million. And here is the part that should truly frighten anyone who dreams of building a water brand. Perrier never fully recovered. Before the scare, its brand made up around 15% of its US subsidiaries' revenue. Afterward, just 3%. Think about the cruelty of that. The very thing that made the brand valuable, the aura of untouchable purity, was the exact thing that made it so fragile. A cheaper, humbler water could have shrugged off a tiny impurity. Perrier could not, precisely because it had sold perfection. It did not sell water, it sold trust. And trust, once broken, is one of the most expensive things in the entire world to try to buy back. That one story is the whole business in miniature, because it shows you both sides at the exact same time. The glorious upside, where you turn a free substance into a luxury and charge whatever the story will support. And the terrifying downside, where your entire empire is balanced on a single promise. A promise that one bad batch, one contamination, one lawsuit, one viral video can shatter overnight. Popularity and durability are not the same thing. A water brand can be in every fridge in the country and still be exactly one recall away from disaster. So now let us gather the killers into one place. The quiet forces eating the margin alive while the owner is still daydreaming about free reign. The first is freight, and we did the math. Over $2 a case on a 1,000-mile haul, enough to erase the whole profit. The second is plastic, tied straight to the price of oil, swinging up on a market you do not control and cannot predict. The third is the giants, buying resin and machinery and shelf space at a scale you could not touch in 100 years, squeezing their own water down to 10% and daring you to survive on less. Take a breath there, because it gets worse. The fourth killer is a private label used against you. The cheap store brand water stacked by the entrance, bottled for almost nothing and sold as a loss leader, exists partly to crush any small brand foolish enough to compete on price alone. And the fifth killer is the silent one. The one that does not show up until the day it destroys you. Regulation and risk. One failed inspection, one contamination event, one lawsuit over the source, one viral clip of something floating in your bottle. Ask Perrier what that costs. In most industries, a mistake costs you a customer. In this one, a mistake can cost you the entire company, because the entire company was only ever made of trust. So let us put the whole thing together into one honest number. You sell a case of 24 bottles to a store for, say, $5. The water inside cost you a fraction of a cent. So far, so magical. But the finished bottles, at a co-packer's 26 cents each, already cost you over $6 before you even shipped them, which is why real operations must bottle at massive scale to get that number down. Add the freight, $2 a case on a long haul. Add the machinery wear, the labor, the energy, the warehouse, the insurance, the marketing, each taking its own quiet bite. And that magical 100 times markup on the water has quietly collapsed into a business fighting for the same 10% the giants fight for, or less. And if oil spikes, or fuel spikes, or a giant undercuts you, those pennies do not just shrink, they turn negative. Fast. That is the trap in one sentence. The markup on the water is a fantasy. The margin on the business is a knife fight. There are two people watching this right now. The first one is still picturing a spring on a hillside, a shiny label, free reign turning into easy money. The second one just understood why the local water company that seemed so obvious, so unbeatable, quietly went out of business a few years ago. Same industry. Two completely different views of the same shelf. So, knowing all of that, should you actually own a bottled water factory? In the optimistic scenario, yes, and it can be genuinely extraordinary. You secure a truly valuable water source, or you build a truly strong brand. You keep your shipping tight and sell close to where you bottle, so freight never gets the chance to eat you. You either lock in a big, steady contract, supplying a region, a major retailer, a chain, an institution, or you climb all the way up into premium and sell identity instead of hydration, the way Fiji and Liquid Death did. You protect your quality obsessively, so the trust never ever cracks. In that world, the margins can be rich, the demand never really goes away, and the brand itself becomes worth far more than the factory that fills it. In the pessimistic scenario, you fall in love with the free reign. You build an expensive plant. You bottle plain water that nobody can tell apart from anyone else's. You try to ship it too far. You get squeezed by oil, squeezed by fuel, squeezed by freight. And then a giant or a store brand undercuts you on the one and only thing you were competing on, price. Now you are defending a $2 million factory with pennies of margin and no brand to hide behind. That is the version that quietly goes broke while the trucks are still rolling and the line is still full. It looks busy right up until the day it looks empty. So who actually wins in bottled water? Really, three kinds of people. And not one of them is simply the dreamer who thinks water is free money. The first winner is the source owner, the person who controls a genuinely special, protected, hard-to-copy source. A real spring, a real aquifer, a real place with a real story that a competitor cannot manufacture in a lab. They are not selling water. They are selling the one thing in this entire industry that can never be turned into a commodity, a place. The second winner is the brand builder. The operator who stops selling a substance and starts selling a name, then charges a premium a plain bottler could never dream of asking for. They turn a heavy logistics business into a light, beautiful brand business. And brands are where the real margin has always lived, which is the whole reason a can of water became a $1.4 billion company. The third winner is the specialist, the local bottler who is smart enough not to try to out-giant the giants. Instead, they win exactly where the giants are too big and too clumsy to bother, supplying a region cheaply because they are close and the freight is short, serving a niche the big boys ignore, a hospital network, a restaurant chain, an office cooler route, a local loyalty that a national brand can never quite buy. On price alone, you always lose to the giants. On source, on brand, or on being close and specific, you can beat them every time. And that right there is the same secret hiding underneath every single one of these businesses. The mall was never about the stores. It was about the crowd. The bar was never about the drinks. It was about belonging. The grocery store was never about the food. It was about certainty. The coffee chain was never about the coffee. It was about the habit. And the bottled water factory was never, ever about the water. It was about trust and logistics and the name printed on the label. A different costume every single time. The same quiet machine humming underneath all of it. So the next time you crack open a bottle of water and pay $1 for something that fell out of the sky for free, do not look at the water. Look at everything wrapped around it. The plastic made from oil that costs more than the water. The truck that burned $2 a case to haul its dead weight across the country. The sealed cap, quietly promising you that it is clean. The label, telling the world a little story about who you are. You were never really paying for the water. You are paying for the certainty that it is safe, the convenience that it is here, and the quiet feeling of the brand sitting in your hand. The water was always free. Everything around it was the entire business. And that was the whole trick, from the very first bottle ever sold. So when everyone else is staring at the water, ask yourself the only question that has ever really mattered in business. Who is quietly counting all the money wrapped around it?